Aloha o Pomai Hoapili ko uinoa. Loa au kana kolu kumahiku makahiki. Noho au paumalu oahu. My name is Pomai Hoapili, 37 years old. I live in Paumalu on the North Shore of Oahu. I went to Sunset Beach Elementary School, and after that I went to Kahuku High School. And actually in Kahuku High School is where my kind of finding for talent evolved with mechanics and woodwork class. And then growing up, I had a good dad who was super handy around the house and was always making and inventing things, so I had a good mentor growing up. Mom and dad worked super hard to keep food on the table, and I grew up with 2 brothers and a sister. And I'm the youngest of my family. So we grew up hanging out all around the house, going to the beach together, learning how to fish and dive, and I later learned how to hunt and stuff like that. And my dad, when he was younger, surfed a lot and would share a lot of these like surf stories with me. And my brothers surfed while I was growing up and continue to surf now. And I'm kind of like the youngest one and kind of like keeping it going a little harder. And trying to pass it on to my daughter. And so growing up over here, it's been pretty mellow. Over the years, there's been like a high influx of different things happening on the North Shore that kind of adjusted the community here and there. But for the most part, the North Shore has been pretty based around surfing. So from a young age, I grew up around professional surfers, and even just hanging out at the beach, you'd see like professional surfers passing by. One of my neighbors was like a really good surfer, and he always had Kelly Slater over at his house. So being a young kid, like seeing these people around is kind of cool and inspiring. I grew up with lifeguards as uncles and aunties, so I grew up with like a water safety kind of background. Always had somebody around in a lifeguard truck or red shorts on. Took part in the Junior Lifeguard Association and in the Junior Lifeguard program from a young age. I think you're supposed to be 13 when you start that program. I think we like kind of broke some of the rules and started showing up at like 10 years old, kind of doing the program on the side. And yeah, we grew up underneath the lifeguard towers and riding people's broken boards and old bodyboards, and we had a good core group of surfers and water safety officers that would help us out when we were little kids about what to ride and where to go and where the waves are going to be good and where we could possibly get the best session for the time being, you know. So I grew up with a good core crew of kids. We all grew up kind of spread out all over the North Shore, from Velziland all the way up into Pupukea and as far away as, you know, Mokalia. All my friends kind of lived along the coastline, so we were always kind of calling each other and seeing where we should surf. Surfing has been a huge part of my life because I don't go to church, so it kind of became my church, and don't really go to the gym a whole lot, so it became like a workout area for me, and I don't really go any place for entertainment. I don't really go out to like go to movies and all that kind of stuff when we're little, so it's like sticks, stones, fire, surfboard. It's like kind of beach life. So I grew up just with those simple things in life, and then slowly transitioning into lifeguarding, and everybody kind of wants to be like a professional surfer when we're younger. So everyone's aspirations from when we're young is like, oh, I want to be a pro, I want to at least surf like them. So for me, I kind of noticed at an early age, like, I don't think I'm going to be a pro surfer. My parents aren't like super supportive of me bailing and surfing all day, so I kind of never grew up with the luxury of like surfing contests all over the island and stuff. So I kind of stuck to more like soul surfing, like longboarding, and experimenting with different crafts like pipple boards and Alaia boards, and some of those things took me really far, meeting like shapers. Ended up becoming really good friends with the people who made my boards because I was a little kid, and I grew up at this area called the Swamp. So kind of like this legendary little shaping shop. It was like where Sunset Beach surfing venue's bathroom is now, is where this old shop, the Swamp, was. And it was this guy Ed Searfoss kind of ran the show over there. He was like a glasser. And when I was a grom, I got a job working for him, scraping the tar off of the glassing bays, and I'd get my dad to help me do like dump runs and stuff. And in trade for work, those guys would make me boards. Ed Searfoss and Third Stone Hawaii would make me boards shaped by Tim Barron, and they'd glass the boards for me. And I had to like give them some money so he could buy the blank, but I had to like do work around the shop, mow the grass, feed their shop dog, bust up the floors in the glassing room. I had to do chores for boards. My family didn't have a bunch of money to spend on surfboards, so it's like, you gotta work for what you got. So those guys would help me out. Uncle Ed was a really good friend of my dad, so he had country surfboards, and so he would kind of hook me up here and there where he could, but I had to put in work. So I learned a little bit about shaping and mostly about ding repair because I grew up at Rocky Point, and if any of you ever surf there, it's not Rocky Point for no reason, and you got to have a Rocky Point special, some people would call back in the day, and it would have a million dings in it. And so when I was a little kid, that was my introduction to like shaping and fiberglass, like fixing dings, filling holes. And some of these guys taught me a lot of valuable lessons about surfing, like, oh, you don't want to do that, Grom, like be here all day fixing your board. So I had all these positive role models from shapers to surfers, and still continue to have that friendship with my shapers, and a lot of different board builders that I look up to, even as surfers. When I was really young, there's this guy, Kirk Bjerk, that lived next to me. He was like really good shaper. A lot of guys who are good would would get boards shaped by him. And the guy ripped super hard. And so from a young age, I knew this guy who could surf his boards that he made. And it was like really inspiring for a little kid. You're like, wow, he made that. And I would see him around, and he would come and tell me like, oh, I just made this yesterday. And you're just like, what? Like, if any of you ordered a board, you know how long it takes to get a board. And for a guy to like bust out a board in a day and a half was like amazing. So Kirk Bjerk inspired me a lot from when I was a young kid. And going through all the different shapers around, eventually found these two guys that live at V-Land, and they do everything from start to finish. Kyle Bernhardt, he started making my stand-up boards. When stand-up paddle surfing got popular, I got boards from Blaine Chambers at Paddle Surf Hawaii, and then I tried out some of Kyle Bernhardt's boards. And to this day, Kyle Bernhardt shapes all my stand-up boards, my guns, some smaller boards for pipe, and he's helped me to like make some stuff. Like he's helped me make this Alaia with finishing and vacuum bagging of a lot of the epoxy stuff, because it's pretty scientific. So Kyle Bernhardt's helped me come a long way in surfing, whether it's like big guns. I've caught the waves of my life, you know, like on some of his boards. And then this other guy, Kent Senator, he's like my really good friend and an inspiration. He actually was one of the first guys to inspire me to go skateboarding. I wasn't really a big skater when I was young. So this shaper up the road from Kyle Bernhardt, they all live on Kaunala, and just those guys showed me skating, and from there kind of like showed me a new way to like train for surfing. So I went skateboarding a lot with Kent Senator, and he puts out like a lot of really good boards, and these guys make boards from start to finish. So when I was young, the thing growing up was like, oh, you order an orange board, you might get a purple board, and it might be a different size. And you'd go through the drama of like, well, what happened to my board or whatever. And you know, shapers would tell you like, sorry man, that's like, I don't know, the glasser did this or the painter did this, and you're like, oh man. So the only way to get a good board that you ordered was to get a board from a guy who did every single step: paint, shape, fin set, glass, sand, all those things are all in one guy. So now I got like these two guys who make magic boards, and they inspire me to create stuff of my own when I have questions or got some funky thing going on. They're like, oh, you just gotta do this, you gotta do that, or what about this? You know, we like share information. So it's kind of like crossed over into the whole mindset of like, okay, riding the boards is one thing. What about making the boards? Like what does what? Hydrodynamics, they never really taught that in high school. So it's like this new thing to be a surfer, a scientist type of a trip. So it's been fun, and been kind of fooling around and playing around with some of these like wooden boards, kind of going back into time a little bit, if you could say. Like some of my ancestors made boards of one piece that were made from native woods, koa, and they made from vili vili and kukui nut. And these boards were, some of them were large, like upwards of 25 feet. And some of this that I do now is like kind of like my connection to the past. And I was just telling someone today when we were surfing, like, I like the idea of keeping one foot in the past, but putting one foot in the future, and then trying to get the best out of both worlds. So right here is like kind of one of my creations to kind of get me back into the past, made out of redwood. And it's not a one-piece board, but all these pieces of wood that are in this board I salvaged out of an old house. Back in the day in Hawaii, there's these popular Hicks homes that are getting sold as kits. And so you could buy a kit home back in the day, I think for like a couple grand, couple $1,000, they'd sell you a redwood kit home. And you could build your whole entire house out of old growth redwood, which they're selling out of California like super cheap. Now you can't go and harvest redwood, and redwood's super expensive. If you try to buy a board foot of redwood, it's really expensive. So I ripped this out of a house. This one came from Nu'uanu. It's an old Nu'uanu house. Traded a 12-pack of beer for an hour and a half of time to rip out the wall myself, and carefully. And this is all just recycled. I rip it out of the wall and I sand it down with a planing machine, and then I glue it together and I shape the outline. And then I kind of put some concave and some rails in it to kind of give it some steerability. And if you see some of these, like these dark lines right here, these are where my board is full on broken, totally off the board. I've broken this particular board twice. So there's a crack here, and I glued it back together, and then there's a crack here, and I glued it back together. So I guess it's like, yeah, I don't know if people who fix broken boards and get even more psyched on them after they're broken, but I'm one of them. But yeah, this is like my version of like an old school Alaia. And this is like kind of in the medium range of surfboards. This is like probably second to the smallest board for like standing up. And they have like smaller ones that guys lay down on. You might see like some of the Waikiki Beach Boys and some of the Makaha guys ride some wooden boards and they lay down on them. Those are called paipo'o. So back in the day, these boards are all one piece, made out of huge trees. Big ceremonial trips to fell the tree and the process of splitting the tree and creating the board. And these boards are kind of challenging to make with modern tools. And I can only imagine maybe in a future project making a board out of all natural tools would be really hard to do. They use stone, teeth, rock, coral, sand, and fish skin, and shark skin, and eel skin for like different types of shaping materials. So you can only imagine, you know, a foam board, modern board will take you a couple weeks for your shaper to get through the whole process or whatever for your short board with foam. You can only imagine how long it would take for somebody to fell the tree, split the log, get into shaping this thing with a wooden axe, finishing it out with a piece of rock or coral or whatever they have, and using like marlin bill and sea urchin spine and different types of fish skins to finish these things. And so if you go to the museum, you'll see these boards with this like magnificent shine on them, and it just kind of baffles me. Some of that information isn't like readily available anymore. So we kind of got to base what we know off of boards that still exist, and they're made out of wood, so they don't last forever unless they're kept somewhere nice. But yeah, this is like kind of my tribute to my ancestors. Keep it going, kind of, you know. I know surfing lives on in all these foam boards and stuff, but to kind of keep it going in a natural state as much as possible and to ride wooden boards is super fun. It's a different feeling. If anybody gets a chance to try something, or if you see me around and you want to switch, let me know. Some older boards were made, you know, back in the day. Different kings and queens had their own style, but the boards are upwards of, you know, 25 feet long. The kiko'o and the olo style of boards were really long. There's examples of them in Bishop Museum of Chief Paki and Princess Kaiulani. The first Hawaiians to take surfing around the world were royalty. Jono Kuhio, his brothers, and Princess Kaiulani. They're the first people to take surfing outside of Hawaii. So Hawaii is a gift. You know, we gave the gift of surfing to the world, but it wasn't by just no common people. It's like by royalty. So surfing is this royal gift to the world that if you trace it all the way back to where it came from and you trace it to the people who took it there, this is a royal sport. This is a sport that was enjoyed by kings and queens. You couldn't just paddle out and surf with them if you wanted to also. Kings and queens before had their own spot, had their own boards. You weren't even allowed to catch the same wave as them. So with all this like going on, you know, nowadays people paddling in and out and in your way. I mean, if you want to go back in the days about it, that wasn't even allowed to be surfing around the king or the queen. And so, yeah, this is like steps that Hawaii took to further their education by sending, you know, royal children to school. And the side effect was surfing made it to the mainland, because Jono Kuhio, his brothers, Princess Kaiulani, they went to the mainland to go to school, to get educated. But in the meantime, they found waves and said in their diaries, oh, we found perfect places for surfboard swimming, is what they called it. And so they had boards made, and you know, they're royalty. Of course, they got some action up there. They're gonna have somebody want to make them a board. So from what I learned, they went to the nearest harbor house and had boards made out of pine and redwood. And so the first place surfed over there was San Lorenzo River. First time anybody had ever seen surfing on these big wooden planks and naked brown guys in the water charging, 3 brothers. And that's it. From there, it's grown like a hot virus all over the world to where somebody you know surfs from around the world somewhere. And almost every continent, almost every shoreline, if it's not already been surfed, people are coming. They're gonna try and surf somewhere. So as much as surfing has exploded all over the world, it came from one little spot in the middle of the Pacific Ocean and then spread to California. And eventually surfing made it to Europe by the same people. By Jonah Kuhio, and later on Princess Kaiulani ended up making it to Europe and going to the English School of Horticulture to learn about farming. And so while they're there, they also discovered waves too, but it was cold. And so they had boards made and they surfed in Britain and all over the place over there. First men and women to surf in Britain. From what I read, they had wool, really tight bodysuits made out of wool for them as like the first wetsuits. So that was kind of an innovation right there already. Back in the day, this is like way before the Duke. They're getting wetsuits made out of wool. And after all that, you know, people started innovating with, you know, the Tom Blake boards, getting them made hollow, like an airplane wing, to different types of wood, balsa wood. You got Greg Knoll them using redwood and balsa to try and lighten up the boards. And eventually somebody came up with foam, and boards have evolved to where some boards are hollow. They don't even have a core. Some boards are totally hollow, made out of carbon fiber. We got boards that have no stringer anymore. Computers are shaping them. Humans are like half of the shaping now, and you know, it's gone through the roof to where people are surfing huge waves that are you know, deemed unrideable before. When guys are riding them, there's barrels that people have probably watched their whole life and never taken an attempt at it, and now people are going for it. So surfing's growing at this crazy accelerated rate, and but it's amazing at where it started, from this little speck in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Going from transition to some of these like wooden boards, I had a chance to kind of go and shape out of different materials, and this is like a bamboo one, and made it out of bamboo. It's like a little lighter and it's way more durable, and we ended up wrapping it in epoxy. So like I said before, I live at Rocky Point, and so I got to survive all those cracks on the rocks. So every time I'd lose my wooden board to the rocks, I'd get like one of these huge dings like you'd see here in the nose, and some of those dings that you get on your board starts the breaking process. So I had my bamboo board wrapped in some epoxy so I could protect it, and this was Kyle Bernhardt helped me glass it, and it came out pretty unreal. So this thing kind of gives me a little bit more float than this board, and it can survive the cracks on the rocks when I lose it, because I do that quite often. So this one's kind of like my tank, can handle more. This one I surf a lot of the time just when I'm like by myself, if I can be. So I'll go to like an uncrowded spot and ride this thing. And yeah, so, and then a couple other things I make is like hand planes. I was inspired to go ride some of these. I seen some of these old guys in front of my house riding hand planes one day, and I asked them how they, you know, how they use that thing, and they're showing me their little boards, and so I had some leftover material, some redwood, and I made one of these. This one's kind of bust up. It's my OG one. I made it 4 or 5 years ago, and I use these along with some fins, and just I keep this in my truck as kind of like surf snack kind of a trip. If I don't have my board and I just randomly got like an hour somewhere and there's waves and I forgot to bring my board, this is like my surf kit that I keep in the back of my seat. And yeah, it comes in handy, you know. Some of those days, it's just not enough to mind surf. So hand plane, pair of fins, ready to go. Right on. So yeah, I'd like to thank Harry, Uncle Harry from Makaha for inspiring me to make my first Pipo board and to get into Alaia surfing boards. Mahalo, Uncle Harry, and I'd like to thank the boys from Third Stone and Uncle Ed Searfoss and coming from the swamp. And yeah, I'd like to thank all of Hawaii for just being who you guys are, and aloha.